Now, if there has been no error, we will want to obtain the list of materials. So we will have to invoke the getList method of SAP material. We will need to pass all these parameters to the method. These last two correspond to the output. The second to last one will be the list of materials, and the very last one will be the collection of warning and error messages that were produced, among others. The other parameters will correspond to the input. In our case, most of them will be empty, because we do not want to filter by plant, distribution channel, organization, and so on. But since we want to recover all the materials, we must load the mat number selection parameter as we did when we tested the method by means of the connector. What we will do then is, in our procedure, define variables for each parameter in the method, which, as we can see, are of the data types imported with the BAPI plus one character of 4. To do this, in our procedure, we drag the structured data types to the variables section, and we will see that the variables are created with the same name. We can change those names to make our code clearer, assuming the same names than those of the method's parameters. We can see that plant selection is of the BAPI mat raw data type, though not simple, but rather collection. This means that it's a collection of this data type. So we mark the variable in the same way, and we change the name. And we can do the same with the rest. We also add the max rows variable of the character 4 type. We've already defined the variables. Now, prior to calling the method to pass those variables, we must load the mat number selection variable to specify that we want it to return the full list of materials. We can see that it's a collection of items of the BAPI mat ram type because it enables us to define several items with conditions for these to be applied in the resulting filter. We will only need to have one item in the collection. We will have to define a variable of this data type, the same as the item in the collection, so it will not be a collection. Then, in the source of the procedure, we assign the I of inclusive to this variable, the sign property, to the property that contains the from of the material number. We assign the asterisk wildcard, and we assign CP, contain pattern, to the filter option. Lastly, we add the content of this variable to the collection variable, to this point still empty, mat number selection, which we will pass by parameter to the method. We also load the max rows variable with a chain of 4 zeros, so that it returns all materials with no restrictions. And now we're ready to invoke the BAPI's method. To avoid typing, we drag. When we type dot, GeneXus automatically writes the only method of the external object and shows us, in an IntelliTip, all the parameters required, highlighting the one we must type this time, which is plant selection. So we choose the plant selection variable, and then the next one, distribution channel selection, and so on. Upon completion of the BAPI's execution, the mat number list and return variables will be loaded, respectively, with the collection of materials and messages. Mat number list is a collection of items of this type, BAPI mat list. Our materials variable is of the data type that we created to keep only the ID and the description. With this one being the variable that will return the procedure, we then have to load it, copying the items from one collection to the other. However, we want to do this only if the getList was successful. We will know this, as we saw it when we tested the BAPI through the connector, by checking if the collection of messages that returns loaded in the return variable is empty, that is to say, if it has no items. Therefore, we must go over each item in the collection of materials again and create a new item in the materials one. So, we will have to create two more variables with a structure equal to that of the items, mat_number_list item, of the same type as mat_number_list, but simple instead of a collection, and materials item of the materials.material type. We will use the mat_number_list item variable to iterate on the collection of materials again. For each item in the collection, to the empty variable, materials item, for material ID, we assign the corresponding value of the current item where we're positioned. And to material description, we assign the description located in this field of the current item. We can already add, to the materials collection initialized empty, the contents of the variable we've just loaded. We reserved new memory area for the materials item variable for the following material to be added. And we finalized the for command. All that's left to do is to program what we want to do in the case of messages. As we did before, we will add them in the output variable and messages. The messages return loaded from the BAPI's getList method in the collection variable and return. So, we will have to go over that collection using a variable of the same data type as the items. For each item in the collection, we reserve memory space for the messages item variable we used before, and we assign value to its properties in accordance with those of the current item. Since ID is varchar and number is numeric, we will have to transform it into string. For the type, we should reduce the possible types of the return to error or warning. For simplicity purposes, here we set warning directly. We close the for and close the if, and then we save. In the next video, we will complete the panel that invokes this procedure, and we will see it in runtime.